Hello everybody, this is Havoc with my review on Thrones of Britannia. Just as a little forward to this video, as I began writing the script, my intent was to keep it rather short, focusing on the biggest points to give you a broad review of the game. That ended pretty quickly. While my review was not a bash fest, as I still very much enjoyed playing the game, there are several things I wanted to address as a very dedicated Total War fan. I also wanted to let my audience know that I did receive a review copy from Creative Assembly as a Total War influencer, though that doesn't mean I'm shying away from constructive criticism. Let's get into it. Released on May 3rd by Creative Assembly, Thrones of Britannia is the first title in their new Saga series, where CA takes a very focused, Total War-worthy point in time and makes a standalone game that's not tied to any major release. In this case, Thrones brings us to the British Isles after the major defeat of the Great Viking Army, letting you play as 10 different factions spread across 5 different culture groups: English, Welsh, Gaelic, the Great Viking Army, and the Viking Sea Kings. While not on the scale and variance of the Warhammer series, which feature completely different fantasy races, the cultures in Thrones of Britannia do feature their own unique units. Vikings will have a huge roster of axemen, the English have solid spears and swords, with the Welsh featuring fabled longbowmen. There is a bit of crossover across the board, but that lends the historical time period well enough, and of the factions that I played, never did I feel slighted in that area. What sets the factions apart more so is their cultural traits, a level of depth I was initially glad to see in a historical title. These cultural traits vary in how you achieve them. Northumbria's Here King mechanic will have you juggling your Viking army and your English subjects, completing certain objectives to appeal to both, while not upsetting either in the same breath. Head north and you'll find Kirken needs to maintain a high legitimacy rating in order to keep their subjects in line. These cultural mechanics work well in the beginning, but ultimately you're doing the same things, such as conquering enemies, forging alliances, and growing your kingdom, in turn filling up a bar that gives you the same buffs as increased public order and army attack bonuses in battle. Essentially different ways to fill the same end result. There are several changes to the campaign map, for better or worse. The new food mechanic is a very nice addition, as now your armies not only have monetary upkeep, but food as well. I was a bit disappointed in the quote-unquote negative effects of having more food consumption than food production though. The -10 reinforcement rate I suffered rarely affected my gameplay, barely slowed down the reinforcement of my armies, and could easily be countered by pumping into a general's forager follower. Supplies was something that did hit a bit harder, thankfully. While it is an easy mechanic to control, it did make me play a bit more strategically, as I couldn't just sit in enemy territory for too long without the risk of running out of supplies and suffering a solid rate of attrition. Simply taking enemy settlements doesn't guarantee you supply increases either, as the building in that particular settlement may not provide any. There were a couple of times I had forgotten that, then wondered why my army was suffering attrition in a recently acquired territory. Sticking with the army, the recruitment mechanic and unit availability is easily one of the best features in Thrones of Britannia. It's a brilliant way to combat both player and AI army spam in the early and mid game, and yes, the AI follows the same mechanics. I've attacked several enemy armies one turn after seeing the AI recruit more units, and they were not at full strength right off the bat. While the recruitment and supply mechanics were one of the highlights of armies and Thrones, there were some downsides, and they do leave a rather army-sized hole in them. Armies no longer had the unique trait system from Rome to an Attila, which left me with a huge disconnect to my men. There was nothing unique about each army aside from certain units I kept with certain generals. It's only the general's traits that determine the benefits of an army, and when a highly decorated general dies, that army no longer receives those buffs, and instead reverts to whatever traits, if any, the new general has. Movement stances have been reduced as well, with normal, fortified, and raiding as your only options. The forced march stance was removed, I presume, to combat the goose chase fest prominent in Attila and Warhammer, and to be quite honest, it is really enjoyable that I can actually catch up to an army around 90% of the time. I do wish it was in the game though, as it now takes several more turns to get anywhere, which means you're also SOL if an enemy gets into your back territory when your armies are on the front lines. Ambush stance is gone, and even though I rarely used it in the campaign, looking back, I believe it still has its place in a Total War title, regardless of historical context or use by the general public. Moving on to generals and governors, I was actually quite satisfied overall with the new follower implementation. While I found myself using the same 2 followers for generals and only 2 or 3 other followers for governors, it was a step forward to make each general and governor unique to his own situation. It's also a very nice touch to see your generals and governors age, both in their unit card on the campaign map as well as in battle. Back to the physical campaign map, minor settlements no longer have garrisons, which I honestly wasn't sure would work out. However, it is very well implemented and provided a nice challenge to the campaign, as I had to immediately respond to an enemy army close to my borders or risk losing several minor settlements. Your minor settlements do prove very crucial to your campaign success, as they hold all of your food and real money-making production buildings. Let an army take 3 or 5 minor settlements, and you could be looking at going broke or starving in the manner of a few turns. What the AI isn't so great at is the opposite. They tend to be drawn towards your largest armies when on the defensive and don't truly seem to prioritize taking back minor settlements. This means it is rather easy to cripple a large enemy by having 1 or 2 full stacks on one side of their empire and having a couple of very small armies on the other taking the undefended villages. Battles in Thrones of Britannia, while relatively short in open fields and minor settlements, did give me a lot of satisfaction. My average 20v20 stack ran anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes. I would have liked to have seen that doubled, especially considering the time period where it was essentially 2 different armies in very defensive wall formations trying to break through each other's lines. The implementation of missiles having a percentage chance to instantly kill a unit, I think, lent to the speed of the battle, but it also guaranteed that, as long as you had a handful of archers, no unit was truly safe when in range regardless of stats. The AI also handled itself pretty efficiently when I played against them. It wasn't always a giant blob fest in the middle of the battlefield. Enemy cavalry and infantry really tried to push my flanks to get to my archers, and enemy reserve units harassed my attempts to get into their backfield. Major settlement battles were an absolute blast. The cities were very well designed for large-scale combat and looked great regardless of the weather. The reformatting of city layouts made for some great open battles in the midst of various cities. Having multiple tiers to take over or defend lended to some deadlier sieges, but an even greater sense of accomplishment, especially in multi-stack battles. The AI movement through the cities in these battles, while not perfect, was also improved over its Attila-based ancestors. Overall, in spite of the faster speed, there was rarely a battle, even when I lost, that I didn't enjoy playing, and I played a vast majority of them in my campaigns. Diplomacy and politics in Thrones of Britannia was very forward-thinking but tended to lack in great execution. With diplomacy, trade was in auto mode, and it took out a rather big diplomatic bargaining chip for me. In Attila, if I was a trade powerhouse, I used that to get agreements and alliances that wouldn't have been possible without me proposing trade. Alliances don't seem very impactful, though I found that vassals are way more helpful during war than in previous titles. This switch meant I would rather risk going to war with a neighbor for the sole purpose of vassalizing, rather than try and bargain an alliance with them. Politics features some new mechanics and some different welcomed options to the Total War series. The family tree is back, and at times made for interesting decisions, such as removing my nephew as an heir, giving it to my son, then having my nephew meet a quick, untimely end to ensure he didn't cause a rebellion. During my campaigns, I was also blackmailed. I was faced with both attempted and successful assassinations, and honestly spent way too much time trying to find the right wife for my disloyal and disgruntled generals and governors. While it is no Crusader Kings, it was amusing and at times difficult trying to hold everything together. The addition of estates was a very cool idea, that low loyalty subjects could be essentially bought by giving them lands. What I do wish is that estates had done more than just secure loyalty though, giving them unique buffs akin to edicts from Attila for instance, as estates were a very essential cog in the functionality of a kingdom, but again, stepped in the right direction. The issue of agents, or complete lack thereof, is an unavoidable one. Taking away all agents is a huge step back in both politics and kingdom management. I do not miss the enemy agent spam, not one single bit. Yet there needed to be some sort of workaround, be it a spy follower that gave generals a huge campaign spotting bonus, or even an option to assassinate an enemy character in the faction diplomacy menu, with multiple options that gave increased chances of success at the cost of more gold. But something should have been done to counter this missing mechanic, and the depth of your campaign does suffer for it. In the positive, technology was completely revamped, and its new system is something I'm very pleased to have in Total War. Tech is locked behind prerequisites in both the military and civil side, unlocking through your actions in the campaign. You can't unlock better axemen and swords until you've recruited enough of them. You wouldn't know how to create heavy siege equipment until you've had a solid number of sieges under your belt, and you won't know cost-effective construction until you built a workshop. This new tech progression is one of those positive steps forward over arbitrary tech in previous titles. The overall design and audio aesthetic in Thrones of Britannia is one of the best parts of the game, and Creative Assembly has done a superb job creating an immersive environment for this game. The detail in the British Isles map is stunning, showing off the various terrain types throughout the entire map. The music is fantastic and has always been one of the strongest staples of Total War games. The UI design is on point and fitting with the time period, as are the unit cards and portraits, which I very quickly got used to once I started playing. From a visual standpoint, Total War has never disappointed to me, and the same goes for Thrones. Is this title worth a buy? It depends on who's asking. Thrones of Britannia is a great historical lead-in for either first-time Total War players or players who began in Warhammer and are looking for a historical title that plays similarly. Thrones is also worth the buy if you're simply a fan of the time period or want to have some fun with a game that has much brighter tones than Attila. But if you're looking for the next major historical title, this obviously isn't it. Even if the mechanics were fleshed out as desired, you'd still be looking at a standalone title that doesn't have the massive content of a major release, which fits its reduced price point. There is a silver lining for those on the fence though, and that's mods. The Total War community is fantastic at creating mods for Total War titles, from simple campaign improvements to complete overhauls, several of which I've absolutely loved playing in Attila, and there are a lot of directions that modders can go with this game. Think War of the Roses or even a William Wallace campaign. In all, Thrones of Britannia feels like a guinea pig title, an experiment for future historical games, and it very well might be. Whether the Saga series has been planned all along or was a quickly assembled response to outraged historical Total War fans, it has a very stripped down, streamlined feel to it. And perhaps that is the goal for Saga titles, though I certainly hope not. There are some extremely solid potential mechanics presented in this title, and if Creative Assembly can hammer them out, then we have some great depth that can change the face of Total War. That's all for my review of Thrones of Britannia. Hopefully it gives you an idea on the details of this title and whether this game is for you. Leave your comments in the comment section down below, subscribe and turn on notifications to keep up to date with future videos. I'll see you in the next one.